Hey everybody, it's Parallax Abstraction, and this is the Geek Bravado Ramble. Man, how's everybody doing? It's been a while since we had some stuff on the channel, isn't it? Yeah, sorry about that. I've been busy for the last little while between work and the new Extra Life Auto Guild I've been involved in, and, well, looking after this fuzzy mutt behind me who just walked into the frame. My girlfriend was actually on an impromptu vacation with her dad for a couple of weeks because she had some time. She's changing jobs and she had some time in between jobs. So I was looking after the animals and the house and everything myself, which kept me busy, and also just decided to take a break and really just focus on playing some video games. Played a bunch of Mortal Kombat 10, finished the campaign for that, which has been pretty cool. Did a whole whack of Bloodborne, which if you follow me on Twitch, you've probably seen. And I did beat Assassin's Creed Unity finally, which has also been interesting. So I've been doing that some, but I'm getting back into the swing of things with this. So I'm a little bit tired tonight because, again, said fuzzy mutt behind me decided he didn't really want to sleep that much last night. So I'm running on about 4.5 hours maybe. But so forgive me if I seem a little out of it, but wanted to talk about this today. It's something that I've been sort of ruminating in the back of my mind for a while. And it is talking about, well, the Japanese game industry, because there was all kinds of a hullabaloo today on the internet about this stuff that's going on with Konami. Konami and specifically Kojima Productions. So if you follow the gaming news, and particularly if you follow the business end of gaming like I do, because I find that stuff quite fascinating, there's been quite a hullabaloo going on the last while. Konami, which is traditionally been a fairly large Japanese video game developer and publisher, has been in a bit of a weird spot the last while. They've had a whole lot of big corporate missteps the last few years. They put out a lot of bad games, had some almost comically, hysterically terrible press conferences. Just seemed to be in a bit of a mismanaged mess, really. And one of the big titles that a lot of people, myself included, were looking forward to from them was Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. And that is still due to come out, along with that and basically only one other console game Konami is putting out this year, which is the yearly iteration of their soccer series. And this all kind of came to a head about a month ago where there was a whole big hullabaloo at Konami about a big, apparently, fallout with Hideo Kojima, the fact that they were taking his name off of everything, all sorts of stuff within flux, and the rumor is that he's basically been fired without being fired. Basically that after this game ships, he's out. And rather than reiterate all that, I'm going to link you guys to a video that went up today, actually, from Super Bunny Hop. Who is a guy, some of his videos I can kind of take or leave. I don't tend to gel with his opinions on a lot of things, but it was a really good, short and tight 8-minute video talking about this whole Konami thing in a much more analytical way. I really liked it, and I would recommend you go check that out. There's no point in me just re-explaining what he was on about with that. But the basic gist of it is that it really looks like Konami is getting out of the video game business. Konami is a very diverse Japanese company. They've been around for a long time, and they have their hands deeply entrenched in the gambling space. Funny enough, the division that does that is called Konami Gaming, but it's gaming in the Vegas sense. So it's literally a company that makes slot machines and pachinko machines. They've been doing that for quite a while, and it's apparently very successful for them. They also, in Japan, if you can believe it, a lot of people don't know this, they own a very successful chain of fitness clubs in Japan. It's called like Konami Sports Life or something like that, but they're literally like a big gym chain in Japan, which seems like the weirdest thing, I know, but they're involved in that, and a lot of people also forget that they own the Yu-Gi-Oh! Collectible card game series, which is like I don't follow that stuff. It's like a Pokemon knockoff or something. I know a bunch of people will probably want to kill me for calling it that, but you know what I mean. It's a collectible card game. They're big into that as well. And it really, really looks like they are just exiting the video game business. This is a company that used to be an absolute powerhouse with video games. And I mean, it's kind of I kind of have a sentimental attachment to it, and it's kind of sad to see this because obviously a lot of what I cover on my channel is retro games, and if you follow my channel, you've already seen a bunch of Konami titles on there. They were one of the big Japanese powerhouses back in the era of the NES, the Super NES, in arcades, and a whole bunch of other things. A lot of the games I remember most fondly from my childhood were put out by that company. And they continued for a long time. They did a lot of stuff in the PS2 and PS1 era that I really liked. And then in the last generation, they still put out stuff, but their output started to drop and get a lot more safe, which frankly is like the entire AAA video game industry. I've talked at great length on this blog and other places about AAA, the AAA game industry, which I really like. I really like AAA games, but that is an industry that is in some deep trouble. And a lot of the Western publishers are becoming extremely risk-averse, putting out slight iterations on the same thing over and over and over again. And it's beginning to look more and more like the Japanese side of the industry is just getting out of it entirely, or severely backing off from it. Because big video gaming, console and PC gaming in Japan has been in decline apparently for some time from what I've read. And it's declining more quickly than it is in other places. Mobile gaming is kind of starting to rule the roost in Japan. And a lot of people who were previously big into console games are just kind of leaving those behind to focus on mobile stuff. And I've talked at length as well about how I think most mobile games are creatively bankrupt, and that while there are good ones out there, the ones that are making all the money right now are pretty terrible. But that seems to be what's taking off there. And rather than try to adopt themselves to figure out how to best cater to the Western market, a lot of these companies who used to be huge, well-regarded, very well-respected powerhouses in the home gaming space are just deciding to back away from that space to say, this is too much risk, it's too expensive, you can crank mobile games out at a very quick pace for a lot less money, and that's what we're going to focus on. And that seems to be the case. You can see a lot of parallels between what's happening at Konami and what's happening at, say, Capcom, for example. There's not been much console output from Capcom this generation. The one big memorable title I can think of by them so far for this generation was Dead Rising 3, which was an Xbox One launch game. And that's kind of it. Like, they've put out some other little things here and there, but there's no big tentpoles coming from them. And there's even less coming from Konami. Square Enix is very heavily invested in the mobile space, but they are in a bit of a different position in that they are still very heavily invested in Western console development in particular, because they bought Eidos a few years ago, which was a publisher that was struggling but had a lot of success in the Western market. And that's paid off for them because they got Tomb Raider, they got Deus Ex, they got Hitman, they got a bunch of other stuff that's actually done pretty well for them. And they're kind of focusing on that, but especially in Japan, apparently mobile is where a lot of they're buttering their bread these days. And it really seems to be that's where things are going. It's some of the larger independent Japanese game developers like Tri-Ace and other companies like that have been bought out by other companies, most of which make mobile games. And that seems to be where the wind is blowing over there. And it was funny today to watch a lot of people freaking out on Twitter. So the latest news about this Konami thing, the whole thing between them and Kojima started about a month ago. But the latest news today was that Konami was going to be delisting their American New York Stock Exchange. They are floated on that stock exchange, and they were going to be delisting that. And when a lot of people hear delisting, they think the worst, because companies like THQ, Midway, and Majesco, which were publishers that all eventually went under, got forcefully delisted before that because their stock price was below a certain minimum threshold that it has to be. Konami's not doing that. Konami's stock price is still worth, when I checked today, it was worth $18.60. So they are in no danger of going anywhere anytime soon. What they were actually doing is they were delisting off the New York Stock Exchange to go to what's called over-the-counter trading, which is what a lot of the big publishers who are not based in North America actually do. Somebody, Michael, I forget his name, Michael Futter, he's from Game Informer. He posted some stuff today about how like Ubisoft and Square Enix and some of the other big non-North American publishers trade in the US that way as well. So it's not an unusual thing. Konami is still financially very healthy. As a company, I think they are still profitable. But it's looking more and more like they're deciding that their video game business is not worth the risk anymore. And I really think, and it's sad, even though I'm not generally big into Japanese gaming, I think we are beginning to see the death of the traditional Japanese game industry. But the thing is, because of the thing I think a lot of people don't understand is that they hear about stuff like this and they panic and they think that all these guys are going away, and they're not, at least not the way you think. It's not necessarily any better for the consumer and lover of video games, but it is still a bit of a different thing. So a lot of Japanese companies, and you have to understand this, you have to understand how Japanese business works, which, you know, I ain't no Japanese MBA or nothing, but I've read up on this a fair bit because of my interest in this space, and because I've previously, especially when I was a retro collector, I followed some Japanese companies that had some perilous business histories, companies like Data East and SNK and things like that. So the way Japanese companies tend to work is a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to be fairly diversified, involved in a lot of industries. So we talked about how Konami is not just involved in traditional video games, but they're involved in gambling, they're involved in mobile games, collectible card games, fitness clubs, which has nothing to do with games whatsoever. They also, I don't know if they still do, but at one point they had a record label that they were doing, and even some real estate stuff, and all these other things. There's another company that used to be really famous back in the NES days called Jalico that made a lot of video games, and they have been out of the video game business for a long time, but they are apparently still a highly successful real estate firm in Japan. That's their main thing now. They pivoted from that into real estate, from video games into real estate. Capcom at one point owned a bunch of arcades in Japan and even in the US for a while. I don't think they do anymore, but they used to. They used to have their hands in a lot of different businesses. Sega, which is another company that's sort of getting out of console development, they very plainly stated they're focusing mostly on mobile and PC gaming now. They still own a bunch of arcades in Japan. They had a very big arcade business. They had a pinball business at one point. They did a whole whack of different things, and still do. They're fairly diversified. They are also owned by Sammy, which is a company who focuses principally on pachinko machines as well. So a lot of these big Japanese companies, it seems to be a common thing in Japanese culture to very heavily diversify your company, which when you think about it is a pretty smart way to run a business, right? You have a company that is actively involved in several different fields, maybe that are not even related to each other, which I'm sure can be a bit of a thing to juggle and get set up. But you leverage yourself, right? And you sort of balance the load so that if one of the industries that you're in, even if it's one that you've been in for a long time, starts to decline or starts to fail, you can get out of that and pivot to these other things. Konami has gaming and fitness clubs, things like that, right? The traditional problem with a lot of the North American publishers that saw a decline that they couldn't handle was that video games were all they did. When you looked at Midway, when you looked at THQ, when you looked at Majesco, when you look at, who else am I missing here? There's plenty of guys that I'm missing. Even little smaller operations like South Peak Interactive, things like that. These were companies that did video games and nothing but. And when they couldn't make their video game business work, they had nothing else to fall back on, so they went under. THQ tried to pivot at one point. They tried to do like their U-Draw thing, which was to get into a weird subset of hardware, and that's actually what helped speed their demise. But they tried to pivot a little bit, but they did it way too late. There are some exceptions. You have companies like Valve, which are a game developer who also runs a, many would say, nearly monopolistic digital distribution service, still tangentially tied to video games, but on the retail side of things as opposed to the development side. So they're involved in two very different things, but they're kind of an outlier. Beyond that, if you want to see big diversified companies, you have to look at stuff like Microsoft, who does, you know, they make the Xbox, but they also make Windows, they make Office, they make server stuff, they got their hand in a million pies. But it's not the common way business is done in the United States or North America in general, and especially in video games. And I think we're seeing the same kind of major decline in the Japanese market that we saw here. I think we're seeing a lot of people who aren't the biggest behemoths just disappearing. But the difference is that because of the way a lot of these companies work in Japan, these companies aren't failing, but their gaming businesses are. So Konami, it looks to be, by all intents and purposes, exiting the video game business. They might still focus on mobile stuff and whatnot, but in terms of the traditional video games, you know, you get a disc, you stick it in the console, you play your game. It looks like they're getting out of that business entirely, or reducing it to such a skeleton thing that they're going to focus on one or two products only, and that's it. They basically only have, Super Bunny Hop said, they basically only have 3 pillars right now, which is Metal Gear, Soccer, and Dance Dance Revolution. So they're either going to narrow and focus only on those, or just gracefully exit it. But they're able to do that while remaining a profitable company because they have all these other divisions that they have carrying the load. Capcom's in a similar position. Capcom is still profitable, despite the fact that they're not really putting out video games, at least not traditional video games lately. Sega, I believe, is still profitable, even though they've been sort of very public and upfront about their struggles in the video game space in recent years. So these guys, rather than waiting until these businesses kill them, are just seeing the writing on the wall, and they're like, all right, we're just going to bow out of here, we're going to move over here, and we're going to keep going. And at the end of the day, if you're a cold calculating shareholder business type, you don't really care what industry these companies are in, as long as they're still in an industry and they're still making money. So I don't think anyone's particularly caring that these companies are deciding to do something else. But if you're someone who's big into video games, and in particular was into the games that these companies made, it's pretty sad to see. And the flip side of this as well is that, you know, when THQ went under, someone came in and bought up a lot of their properties, and some of those properties have continued on and been revived. When Midway went under, Warner Brothers bought most of Midway, and now, you know, I was just talking about how much I enjoy Mortal Kombat X. Warner Brothers made that possible by buying the property from Midway and continuing it on. The problem is, the flip side of this issue is that these companies are not going under. So the Capcoms and Konamis are not going under, which means they still own all these games and these intellectual properties. And based on what I've seen happen in the past, even though they own these properties and probably won't be doing much with them, it is not really in their interests to do anything with them. We're probably not going to see them get sold to other companies or licensed out to other companies to make games. We're probably going to see them sit on them. Konami will probably make, apparently earlier this year in Super Bunny Hop's video, they showed that they announced like a Neo Contra slot machine. So they're probably going to use them for stuff like that. You'll probably see, you know, a friggin' Metal Gear and a Castlevania slot machine at some point, but you're not necessarily going to see new games in those series. And they're probably not going to be interested in licensing those out to anybody. Similarly, we're not going to see probably a lot of the good Capcom series that we really like get licensed out to other companies. So these things are just going to sit and wither and not get used, and the people who love those series are probably not going to see new games come out in those series, because these companies obviously have no incentive to get rid of them, so why would they, right? And that's kind of a bummer in a way. I mean, I don't want the, obviously, I'm not a cold bastard. I don't want to see these companies go under. I don't want to see tons of people get put out of work. If Konami is in fact getting out of video games, there's probably going to be a ton of people losing their jobs. Similarly, if Capcom decides to back off that stuff and Sega decides to back off that stuff, a lot of talented game developers are probably going to be out of work, and that's not what the game industry needs right now. This industry needs more talent, but it seems to be bleeding it at a rather terrifying pace, frankly, at least in the big space, which is really disconcerting. And I don't want to see that, but at the same time, I think back to Konami, Capcom, Sega, even SNK, and I think of a lot of stuff from my past that I really, really loved. Games that I really loved, and games that I would love to see a modern take be done with. And that may not happen, or at least not in any kind of meaningful way going forward. And though many people would argue that Metal Gear probably should have ended a long time ago, I believe Kojima's even said that he kind of wished it had ended a long time ago. Every new Metal Gear game that's come out as a fan of that series has been fantastic. And it's a real bummer for me to think that there will probably not be another one. Or if there is, it's going to be some crappy mobile game or even some weird console spin-off game that the lead visionary for the series won't be involved in because he's been pushed out. I mean, if you look at that Super Bunny Hop video, it frankly looks like Konami's run by a bit of a friggin' asshole dictator who is apparently willing to gamble the careers of a lot of talented people because of some stupid feud. And it really doesn't seem like he places much value on the people who work for him, which is pretty shitty. And that's not necessarily someone I wish a lot of success to, but as someone who really likes a lot of this stuff, I don't want to see it go away either. But yeah, it looks like the Japanese game industry is really experiencing the same readjustment, and many would say decline, that the Western AAA game industry is, but because of the way Japanese businesses work, it's just happening a different way. And I think that that's probably true, but it's a real bummer as well. And it's kind of a worrying time if you're into big gaming. Like I've said before, I'm all for small games, I'm all for indie games, but I like big AAA titles because they do contain experiences you can't get from smaller games. And frankly, I like games that push technology. Few things push the bleeding edge of technology more than gaming does. And it's AAA gaming that does that. And I like to see, as a technology enthusiast as well, I like to see technology getting pushed forward in the gaming space. And that's happening less and less because it's just becoming impossible to make money in that space without relying on the safest of bets. And it's getting to the point where companies, even the size of Konami, a company that has been around in gaming since there was gaming, can't figure out how to do it. You know, Capcom can't figure out how to do it. Sega can't figure out how to do it. Sega, who made some of the most beloved game hardware of all time at one point, can't figure out how to make it work. And the other guys, the Activisions, the EAs, the Ubisofts, the Take-Twos, they're clinging to their cash cow franchises with both hands, and they're terrified to do anything else because one failure can erase 10 successes in this space. And gamers bitch and whine that they want innovation and they want new titles, and then they don't step up and buy them, and they wonder why we get the same thing every year. It's a tough spot, and it's a bummer because I really like that, and I really like that kind of stuff, and I don't want to see all this, the amazing stable of stuff that the Konamis and the Capcoms and the Segas and that of the world have. I don't want to see that stuff go back in the vault and just sit there and languish forever. You know, I'd love to see some of these awesome properties get new, fresh, interesting, modern games. I don't want to just have to keep going back and playing this stuff on retro systems. But I don't know. It's tough. And like I said, we're seeing a decline. It's just happening a different way because Japanese business works differently than American business. But yeah, I don't think this is the last we're going to see of this kind of thing. I think especially from Japan, the writing has been on the wall for a while. A lot of people have been sitting there just kind of going, wow, it's weird that Konami and Capcom are not putting out a lot of games, isn't it? And a lot of people just saying, oh, there's stuff coming, they just haven't talked about it yet. Maybe that's true to a certain degree, but the more I've been hearing about this, and it's been going on for a while, the more it really seems like these companies are just kind of saying, nah, video games aren't worth it anymore, we're going to go do something else. And while the North American version of that usually involves closing your doors, these guys are just saying, no, we're going to close this door and open the other one. But the one over here probably doesn't interest all the hardcore gamers in the world. That's too bad. I don't know how this problem fixes itself. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe some new form of crash is necessary, and it's going to have to shake stuff out and sort of give the game industry a bit of a revolution. Because I like a lot of indie games, but I also don't like where large influential elements of the indie game community are going and where they're trying to lead things either. And that's not what I want my gaming to become either. There needs to be a mix of both. And it seems to be getting harder and harder for that to be realized. So I don't know, but I just wanted to put that out there because there was a lot of rather funny speculation about this from people. And I find it really funny because a lot of the stuff that I just told you here and that I've learned was not hard to learn and not hard to find out. And it just seems that people are speculating and not really knowing what they're talking about. And it's kind of funny, but also kind of sad. And I just figured I'd put that out there. It's going to be a very interesting couple of years to follow the Japanese side of the gaming industry to see where it goes. We've got two different components of the same industry, the Western market and the Japanese market, which operate in very, very different ways, but are both facing the same challenges. And they're both approaching it in very different ways. And which method is going to work, or if either of them is going to work, or if both are going to work, who knows? But it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. I just hope they all come out of it for the better, because what works for them ends up working for gamers as well. And that's ultimately what we're all here for, right? But anyway, yeah, just thought I'd put that out there. But I'm curious what you guys think about this. Do you think these companies are going away? Do you think they're just prepping themselves for a new wave of up and coming stuff that we're going to see? Do you really just think this is a sign that this segment of the industry is just doomed as we know it, or what? Leave a comment here or on the blog post if you want. I'd be curious to chat about this. I say what I think based on my observances, but there's a lot of other potential things out there too, and I'd like to hear some other perspectives. So yeah, let's have a chat about it. And yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. That does help me out a great deal. And yeah, there's going to be more content coming soon, maybe a couple more of these, definitely more retro flashback stuff. And I'm hoping to have the time to start another play series of some kind in the near future, so we'll see how that goes. But watch this space, and there'll be more coming. So thanks for watching, guys, and, well, I'll see y'all next time. Take it easy.